The night you first learned to make fire changed everything. Not just that night, but every night that followed for the next 100,000 years. Picture it. Darkness absolute. Cold creeping through hides and grass bedding. And then, with patient spinning of wood against wood, a tiny ember glows. Warmth. Light. Safety. The difference between surviving and thriving. Tonight, we're exploring the most transformative technology in human history, one so ancient we've forgotten its revolutionary power. How did Homo Sapiens, our direct ancestors, learn to control fire when it had terrified every species before them? Not through a single brilliant discovery, but through generations of careful observation, patient experimentation, and accumulated wisdom passed from experienced hands to young learners across thousands of years. Fire wasn't conquered in a moment. It was gradually understood, piece by piece, technique by technique, until these first modern humans could create flame from nothing but wood and determination, could carry it across landscapes, could use it to transform food and tools and environments in ways that separated them forever from every other creature on Earth. We'll discover how friction fire demands understanding wood properties and sustaining effort for minutes without pause. How percussion sparks require recognizing specific stones and catching fragments of heat smaller than rice grains. How cooking didn't just make food taste better, but actually changed human biology, shrinking our guts and growing our brains. How fire's warmth pushed human territory from tropical Africa to frozen tundra 10,000 miles north. How flames guarding the night transformed humans from prey to protected, from vulnerable to confident. And the honest truth, fire control wasn't magic or accident, but sophisticated technology requiring knowledge, skill, teaching, and social cooperation, demonstrating the human capacity for cumulative learning that builds across generations. If sleep finds you before the story ends, perfect. That's exactly why we're here. If these stories bring you rest, a subscription means you'll never run out of them. There's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description if you'd like to help keep these stories coming. And a simple like helps someone else discover this quiet corner of the internet tonight when they need it most. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let's travel back to a time when fire was still wild, when creating flame required knowledge hard-won through countless experiments, and discover through patient telling how our ancestors transformed the most dangerous force in nature into humanity's most essential tool, the foundation for everything that followed. The sky splits with light that comes before sound, and in that suspended moment between flash and thunder, everything holds its breath. The bolt finds earth somewhere beyond sight, beyond the ridge where trees cluster thick, and the sound follows, rolling across distance like stones tumbling down a slope. Then comes something else, something that changes the air itself. A scent sharp and unfamiliar, smoke carrying on wind, and against the darkening sky appears a glow that wasn't there before, orange and bright and growing, spreading through the forest where lightning struck and found dry wood waiting. Homo sapiens watch from high ground, these first modern humans tracking the fire's progress with eyes that recognize both danger and opportunity. Flames move through undergrowth, consuming branches and grass, throwing heat that can be felt even from this distance, transforming everything they touch from solid matter into light and warmth and rising smoke. This isn't the first fire they've witnessed. not the first lightning strike or volcanic flow or spontaneous combustion in deadfall dried by summer sun. Fire appears in the world regularly, born from natural forces beyond human control, a phenomenon both terrifying and mesmerizing, dangerous and alluring, capable of destroying everything in its path, yet offering something that cold nights make desperately desirable. The fire burns for days, consuming the forest section by section. Each morning brings Homo sapiens back to the ridge, observing how flames move with wind, how they hesitate at streams and draw back from bare rock, how they die in areas already burned and flare up when reaching new fuel. This observation isn't idle curiosity, but careful study born from necessity. Understanding fire's behavior means understanding something fundamental about the world, about what elements sustain this strange and powerful thing that transforms matter itself. They notice how fire needs three elements to exist and spread: something to burn, which they will eventually call fuel; air, which they sense by watching flames bend and grow with wind; heat, which they feel radiating outward in waves that warm skin from distances where smoke obscures everything else. When rain finally comes, falling heavy and sustained through an afternoon that turns day nearly as dark as night, the fire dies section by section. Steam rises where water meets heat, until by evening only scattered areas still burn, protected beneath overhangs or in hollows where rain couldn't reach. By the next morning, even these have faded to smoldering coals that glow red when wind touches them, but no longer produce flame. Water and fire are enemies. This much becomes clear through observation. The coals stay warm for days after flames have vanished, maintaining heat without producing light. Someone approaching cautiously discovers this residual warmth, concentrated in places where wood has burned down to charred material that glows when disturbed, but doesn't burst into flame without additional fuel added. This knowledge accumulates slowly through repeated observation of many fires across many seasons. Fire doesn't simply exist or not exist, but rather exists in stages, from initial flame to established blaze to eventually coals that maintain heat while consuming fuel slowly. Each stage offers different qualities and requires different maintenance. A piece of wood placed on glowing coals will eventually catch fire if left long enough in contact with sufficient heat. The wood first darkens, then begins to smoke, then releases tiny flames that spread across its surface until the entire piece is burning. This process takes minutes or sometimes longer depending on wood type and coal temperature. Fire can be encouraged to grow through patient feeding rather than requiring constant flame to exist. Watching natural fires and their aftermath, Homo sapiens begin to recognize patterns in what burns readily and what resists flame. Dry grass catches almost instantly when touched by fire, burning fast and hot, but consuming completely within moments, leaving only ash and requiring constant replacement to maintain flame. Small twigs burn almost as quickly but last slightly longer, their flames brighter and more sustained than grass. Larger branches burn slowly, the flames taking time to establish across their surface, but once burning, maintaining steady heat for extended periods, sometimes an hour or more for a substantial piece of wood. Dead standing trees, dried by sun and wind, burn intensely once ignited. Their wood has lost moisture that would otherwise prevent or slow combustion. Green wood, freshly cut or broken from living trees, resists burning, producing more smoke than flame. It hisses and steams as internal moisture fights against heat. Moisture content affects burning behavior significantly. Pine and other resinous woods burn hotter and faster than hardwoods like oak or ash. The difference is notable enough that people begin remembering which trees produce which burning characteristics. This knowledge seems simple but represents careful observation and memory, the beginning of accumulated technical understanding about material properties and their interaction with fire. Different materials produce different smokes, another observation that accumulates through watching many fires under many conditions. Wet wood and green branches create thick white smoke that stings eyes and makes breathing difficult, hanging low in still air and obscuring everything nearby. Dry wood produces thinner, darker smoke that rises more readily, dissipating faster and causing less discomfort. Certain plants, when burned, create smoke with distinctive smells, some pleasant, others acrid and unpleasant. Animal fat dripping into fire produces black smoke that smells of burning meat and leaves greasy residue on anything it touches. These observations about smoke teach something important beyond comfort. Smoke behavior reveals whether fire is burning efficiently with adequate air and fuel or struggling with inappropriate materials or insufficient oxygen. The smoke itself becomes a signal that can be read like tracks in snow or changes in cloud formations, another language of the natural world learned through patient attention. Where fire has burned, the ground itself changes in ways that persist long after flames have died and coals have cooled. Wood becomes charcoal, a black, lightweight material that crumbles when squeezed, but maintains the shape of its original form. Branches remain recognizable as branches, though transformed into something entirely different. Plants become ash, white or gray powder that blows away in wind, all organic matter consumed and reduced to mineral residue. Stones that were present in the fire develop cracks, sometimes splitting completely from internal stresses created by rapid heating. Their surfaces change in color, pinks and grays becoming reds and blacks. Clay exposed to intense heat hardens, becoming resistant to water rather than dissolving in it. This transformation will eventually lead to deliberately created pottery, but first is simply observed as natural consequence of fire. Bones burned in fire become brittle and white, their internal structure altered by heat, breaking easily into fragments rather than maintaining the toughness of fresh bone. Each of these transformations represents fire's power to permanently alter materials, changing their fundamental properties through heat alone. A kind of magic that operates according to consistent rules discoverable through observation. The cooling of a burned area reveals something else important. Fire leaves behind not just destruction, but also usable materials and changed landscapes. The ash scattered across burned ground will enrich soil once it mixes with earth, though this effect isn't immediately obvious and requires seasons to become apparent. Charcoal scattered through burned areas can be gathered and saved. Unlike wood, it doesn't rot when exposed to moisture, maintaining its properties indefinitely if kept dry. The cleared space left by fire creates openings where new plants will grow, different species than forest shade supports. Pioneer plants that prefer sun and disturbed soil. Where these plants grow, certain animals come to feed. Deer and other grazers attracted to fresh growth. Fire, even natural fire, reshapes landscapes in ways that affect food availability and animal movements. Another pattern that observant Homo sapiens begin to recognize and remember. Sometimes when a natural fire burns near where Homo sapiens camp or shelter, someone approaches to feel the warmth it radiates. Standing at a distance where heat is pleasant rather than painful, this direct experience of fire's thermal benefits creates desire to maintain that warmth beyond the fire's natural duration. The first attempts to manage fire probably involve simple acts of preservation, pushing together coals that have separated, adding dry wood found nearby to a fire that's beginning to die, staying near a naturally occurring fire as long as possible before it completely extinguishes. These small interactions represent the earliest stages of fire relationship, not yet control, but rather opportunistic cooperation with natural phenomenon, extending its benefits through minimal intervention. A fire that might burn out by midday when left alone can be kept going through the afternoon and into evening if someone periodically adds fuel. If that fuel feeding continues through the night, the fire can last until dawn, providing continuous warmth and light for an extended period. This extended duration represents significant advantage over natural fires that burn until fuel runs out or weather extinguishes them. Maintained fire means extended benefits without waiting for another lightning strike or volcanic event to provide new fire. Maintaining natural fire teaches fundamental lessons about fire behavior that will eventually enable deliberate fire creation. Keeping fire alive requires understanding what it needs to continue burning and what causes it to die. Fire that receives too much fuel too quickly smothers, the flames unable to establish fully before new material blocks airflow. Feeding must be gradual and measured, allowing each addition to catch and burn before adding more. Fire in strong wind burns intensely, but consumes fuel rapidly, the increased airflow accelerating combustion. Fire in still air burns more slowly and steadily, demonstrating air's role in combustion rate. Fire exposed to rain dies quickly unless protected. Water extinguishes flames and cools coals below the temperature needed to maintain combustion. Fire sheltered beneath overhangs or in caves can burn through storms that would extinguish exposed fire. Protection from water is essential for fire maintenance. Coals covered with ash maintain heat longer than exposed coals. The ash layer acts as insulation that slows heat loss while still allowing enough air to prevent complete extinction. This technique becomes crucial for overnight fire maintenance. Banking coals in the evening so they remain viable for restart in morning rather than having to maintain continuous flame through the night represents significant reduction in fuel requirements and labor investment. The wood types that burn best become recognized through repeated experience with maintained fires, creating knowledge that exists in memory and gets passed to others through demonstration and explanation. Oak and ash and other dense hardwoods produce coals that last hours, glowing steadily and radiating consistent heat. They're ideal for cooking fires or overnight banking, but harder to ignite initially compared to softer woods. Pine and spruce and similar soft woods catch fire readily and burn with bright flame, but consume quickly and produce more spark throwing. They're useful for quick warmth or light, but require more frequent feeding. Birch bark peels in papery layers that catch fire almost instantly, even when slightly damp, making it valuable as ignition material. The first layer added to coals to encourage flame development. Dead standing wood, thoroughly dried by weather but not yet rotted, burns cleaner and better than wood taken from the ground where moisture from soil has degraded its burning qualities. These distinctions seem simple stated directly, but represent hundreds or thousands of individual experiences with different woods under different conditions. Accumulated knowledge that transforms fire maintenance from random experimentation into reliable technique based on understanding of material properties and their interaction with combustion. Wood preparation becomes part of fire maintenance as Homo sapiens learn that size and arrangement of fuel affects burning behavior. Large logs placed directly on small fires don't catch readily. The limited flame is insufficient to heat substantial mass to ignition temperature. But if smaller pieces are burned first to establish coal bed, then progressively larger pieces added as heat increases, eventually even substantial logs will catch and burn. This progressive sizing represents important understanding of heat accumulation and ignition temperature requirements. Wood split into smaller pieces catches faster than whole branches. Split wood exposes more surface area to flame and heat, allowing faster temperature rise toward ignition point. Whole branches require time for exterior to burn through before interior wood becomes exposed to heat. Wet wood can sometimes be burned if placed near fire first to dry. The heat evaporates surface moisture over minutes or hours until the wood becomes combustible. This requires patience and planning, putting wood near today's fire so it will be ready for tomorrow's, rather than expecting immediate use. Arranging wood with gaps between pieces allows air circulation that increases burning efficiency. The oxygen flows between fuel pieces and supports more complete combustion. Wood packed tightly smothers itself by blocking air access, producing more smoke and less flame. These arrangements become part of learned fire technique, knowledge transmitted from experienced fire tenders to those learning the skill. Each generation builds on previous understanding rather than discovering everything anew. The places where maintained fire burns regularly begin showing modifications created intentionally to improve fire management. The earliest hearth structures developed through practical problem solving rather than predetermined design. Fires built directly on ground spread unpredictably unless constrained, so stones get arranged in circles or semicircles to contain the burning area. This keeps coals concentrated and prevents fire from spreading to surrounding dry grass or other unintended fuel. These stone arrangements also radiate heat after stones warm, increasing fire efficiency by reflecting heat back toward the center and forward toward people, rather than allowing it to dissipate in all directions. Certain stones crack when heated, especially river stones that contain trapped moisture, so stone selection for hearths becomes another learned skill. Homo sapiens prefer types that tolerate temperature changes without fracturing. Areas of ground used repeatedly for fire develop hard surfaces where heat has altered soil structure. Clay bakes into something approaching pottery hardness, creating natural fire-resistant base that prevents fire from spreading down into ground or setting root systems on fire. Wind protection gets added. Arrangements of stones or positioning of fire near rock faces or in natural depressions where wind can't scatter coals or blow flame unpredictably. This demonstrates understanding that fire management requires attention not just to fuel, but to environmental factors affecting combustion. Archaeological evidence from sites occupied repeatedly over generations shows this hearth evolution from simple ash scatters indicating fire locations to stone-lined pits with prepared bases to complex structures incorporating multiple features designed for different purposes. This progression is visible in layered deposits showing increasingly organized fire use over time, demonstrating how fire management knowledge accumulates and refines across many human lifetimes. Understanding fuel represents one of fire control's most crucial knowledge domains. Fire's behavior depends primarily on what material is being burned, and different materials burn in dramatically different ways. This requires accumulated experience to recognize which woods and plants and other burnable substances suit which purposes and conditions. The knowledge begins with basic observation that not all wood is equal. Dead wood burns better than living wood, dry wood better than wet. But it extends far beyond these simple distinctions into nuanced understanding of dozens or hundreds of plant species and their burning characteristics. Seasonal variations in fuel quality, preparation methods that improve burning properties, and matching of fuel types to intended fire uses create a knowledge system complex enough that learning it requires years of experience and dedicated teaching from those who already possess the understanding. The foundation is recognizing that wood hardness affects burning duration and heat production significantly. Dense hardwoods like oak and ash and maple contain more combustible material per volume than soft woods like pine and willow. Hardwood fires burn longer and produce more sustained heat from smaller fuel volumes. Softwoods ignite more easily and burn with brighter flame, but require more frequent feeding and produce less total heat per piece of wood consumed. The distinction between hardwood and softwood isn't academic classification, but practical knowledge learned through direct experience. Gathering fuel, carrying it to camp, burning it, and observing results teaches wood properties as directly as flame characteristics do. Hardwoods are heavier to carry, requiring more effort to transport from forest to hearth. But this extra weight represents concentrated fuel value that pays back through extended burning time. Softwoods are lighter and easier to gather in quantity, useful when fuel supply is nearby and frequent feeding isn't problematic. Less efficient when fuel must be carried long distances or when maintaining fire through night without tending. Resinous woods like pine and fir contain flammable sap that burns very hot and throws sparks dramatically. They're excellent for quick ignition and bright light, but potentially dangerous near stored materials or in confined spaces where flying sparks might cause unintended fires. Fuel selection requires considering not just burning duration, but also fire safety and appropriate contexts for different fuel types. Wood moisture content affects burning behavior so profoundly that understanding moisture becomes essential fire management skill. The difference between successfully burning and failing to maintain fire often depends primarily on fuel dryness rather than technique or other factors. Freshly cut green wood contains enough internal moisture that attempting to burn it produces mostly smoke. The heat energy that should create flame instead goes into evaporating water, making green wood nearly useless as fuel except in dire circumstances where no alternative exists. Wood that has died but remains standing, killed by fire or disease or lightning but not yet fallen, dries naturally through seasons of sun and wind exposure. This standing dead wood is recognized as ideal fuel that ignites readily and burns clean and hot, premium fuel worth extra effort to obtain. Fallen wood lying on ground absorbs moisture from soil contact, degrading burning quality proportional to how long it has lain there. Wood that fell recently burns acceptably, while wood that has lain for seasons or years becomes punky and rotted and barely combustible even when surface appears dry. Fuel selection requires judging not just current dryness, but history and condition, indicating internal quality. Bark holds moisture longer than exposed wood, so debarked wood dries faster and burns better. This leads to practice of stripping bark from collected fuel when time permits, improving burning performance significantly with small additional labor investment. Seasonal variations in fuel availability and quality create planning challenges that require understanding annual cycles of plant growth and senescence. Fuel that burns well in autumn after months of summer drying becomes marginal or unusable in spring after winter moisture exposure. Late summer and autumn represent optimal fuel gathering times in many climates, Dead wood is thoroughly dried, and new dead material from summer storms is available for collection. Spring brings challenges of wet conditions that make even previously dry fuel difficult to burn until several dry days restore its combustible properties. Winter in cold climates presents different fuel challenges. Snow covers ground fuel and makes collection difficult, requiring either substantial fuel stockpiling before winter arrives or ongoing fuel gathering even during difficult weather conditions. Deep snow and extreme cold make collection dangerous and exhausting. Both approaches demand substantial labor investment and planning that wouldn't be necessary in warmer climates where fire needs are intermittent. Summer and very dry climates can create opposite problem of too much available fuel becoming fire hazard, requiring careful fire management to prevent accidental spread to surrounding vegetation. Optimal fuel conditions exist in middle range between too wet and too dry. Adequate moisture in environment to prevent accidental fire spread, but not so much that fuel won't burn reliably. Different parts of plants burn differently, creating additional fuel knowledge categories beyond wood type and condition. Bark and leaves and seeds and roots all have distinct burning properties requiring different handling and application. Bark from most trees burns quickly with much smoke, making it less desirable as primary fuel, but potentially useful as ignition material or for creating smoke signals when that's desired purpose. Dry leaves and grass catch fire almost instantly, burning in moments and producing brief, intense heat, ideal for igniting kindling, but useless for sustained heat. They require enormous volumes to maintain fire for any significant duration. Pine needles fall somewhere between leaves and small twigs in burning duration, creating modest, sustained flame when massed together and ignited. Seeds and nuts, when dry, can burn surprisingly well, producing good heat, though usually too valuable as food to use primarily as fuel, except when available in great abundance. Roots contain dense wood that burns slowly and steadily, useful for overnight fires or cooking fires requiring consistent moderate heat for extended periods. Animal dung, when dried, becomes acceptable fuel in regions where wood is scarce, burning with distinctive smell but producing adequate heat for cooking and warmth. This demonstrates that fuel knowledge includes not just plant materials, but any burnable substance available in the environment. Preferences adapt to local resource availability rather than being fixed prescriptions applied universally. Fuel preparation extends beyond simple gathering to include processing that improves burning characteristics or makes storage and transport more efficient. Techniques develop gradually as fire use becomes more sophisticated and systematic. Splitting larger wood pieces exposes interior wood to air and accelerates drying, allowing recently collected fuel to become usable more quickly than whole logs would. Removing bark from collected wood slightly reduces total fuel mass, but significantly improves drying time and burning cleanliness. The trade-off often favors debarking despite reduced total fuel quantity. Breaking or cutting wood to standardized lengths makes stacking and storage more efficient and allows better fire management through using predictably sized fuel pieces rather than random lengths requiring individual assessment. Creating distinct fuel categories stored separately enables quick fire starting without searching for appropriately sized material when fire is needed urgently. Tinder and kindling and small wood and large wood maintained in separate piles. This organization represents systematic approach to fire management that goes beyond simply having fuel available to having right fuel types readily accessible when needed. The relationship between fuel characteristics and fire temperature becomes crucial for applications requiring specific heat levels. The same fire structure with different fuel produces significantly different temperatures, affecting cooking results and tool processing outcomes. The difficulty of maintaining fire continuously through storms and wet seasons eventually creates desire for ability to create fire deliberately rather than depending on natural sources that require constant maintenance. This desire drives experimentation that leads to discovery of ignition methods, though these discoveries take generations of trial and observation rather than sudden breakthrough. Fire creation represents more sophisticated challenge than fire maintenance, requiring understanding not just of what fire needs to burn, but of how to generate initial heat necessary to start combustion without already having fire. The key insight that enables fire creation is recognizing that heat can be generated through friction. This observation comes from noticing that vigorous rubbing of materials against each other produces warmth. Hands rubbed together become warm on cold days. Wood dragged across ground sometimes shows heat, darkening where friction was greatest. Stones struck together feel warm to touch afterward. These small temperature increases suggest that sufficient friction might generate heat intense enough to cause combustion if conditions are right and effort is sustained long enough to reach ignition threshold that separates warm materials from actually burning materials. The simplest friction fire method involves rotating a straight wooden stick rapidly between palms while pressing it downward into a small depression carved in a flat piece of dry wood. The friction between the spinning stick and the stationary base generates heat that builds gradually over what might be 2 or 3 or even 5 minutes of sustained effort, depending on wood selection and technique precision. The point of contact darkens from pale wood color to brown to black as temperature rises. Fine wooden dust accumulates in the depression and begins to char as the temperature climbs toward the threshold where combustion becomes possible, somewhere above 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Though Homo sapiens don't think in such terms, they develop felt sense of when ember formation is approaching based on smoke quantity and color and the feel of resistance changing as wood dust accumulates and compresses. This process requires understanding multiple interconnected principles simultaneously rather than just mechanical movement. The wood types must be carefully selected. The spindle needs to be slightly harder than the base to generate maximum friction without either material being so hard they resist or so soft they compress without heating. This demonstrates that friction fire demands knowledge of wood properties and careful material selection before technique even begins. The pressure applied during drilling must be exact enough to create heat without slowing the rotation so much that friction decreases. This requires balance between downward force and rotational speed. Too much pressure makes spinning impossible, while too little pressure creates insufficient friction for heat generation. Finding this optimal pressure requires experience that develops through many attempts. The effort must be sustained long enough for accumulated heat to reach ignition temperature rather than dissipating into surrounding wood. The practitioner must maintain consistent technique for several minutes continuously without pause or significant reduction in speed or pressure. These physical demands exhaust arms and hands quickly until strength and endurance develop through repeated practice. The hand positions must allow continuous rotation despite progressive downward movement as spindle wears into base. This requires careful coordination of palm pressure and stick contact that prevents stick from popping out of depression or hands from sliding off stick ends. Technical details that seem minor but determine success or failure and must be learned through guided practice and correction rather than being obvious to first-time practitioners. Before drilling even begins, There must be prepared beforehand the carefully constructed nest of completely dry grass and fine bark shavings that will catch the tiny ember when it finally forms. Ember formation represents only middle stage of fire creation rather than final success. The glowing coal, smaller than rice grain, requires immediate transfer to prepared tinder and gentle blowing to grow and spread into flame. The complete fire-starting sequence requires multiple prepared materials and smooth coordination between drilling phase and ember nurturing phase. Any fumbling or delay during transition causes ember to cool below viability before flame develops. The tinder nest is formed by hand into bird's nest shape, perhaps the size of 2 fists together, with slight depression in center where ember will be placed. The material is arranged loosely enough that air can circulate throughout, but not so loose that it falls apart when handled or blown upon. When ember forms in the friction fire notch, it gets carefully transferred to tinder nest center using thin piece of bark or wood to slide it from notch without touching and cooling it. Then nest is gently folded around ember while being lifted and blown upon. The blowing provides additional oxygen that makes ember glow brighter and spread into surrounding tinder. The practitioner watches carefully as smoke increases and changes from white to darker color, indicating rising temperature, continuing to blow steadily but not so hard that ember gets scattered or blown out until suddenly small flame appears in the tinder, growing rapidly as prepared material catches. Then, burning nest is quickly but carefully placed on previously arranged kindling where flame can spread to progressively larger fuel pieces. The entire sequence from ember formation to established fire takes perhaps 2 minutes if everything is prepared properly and technique is executed smoothly. Learning hand drill firemaking requires extended practice under guidance from someone who already possesses the skill. Many technical details must be performed correctly simultaneously. Any single error often causes complete failure even when other elements are done well. Distinguishing which error caused failure requires experience that beginners lack, making teaching relationship essential for skill transmission. The teacher demonstrates complete sequence multiple times, explaining each step's purpose and showing proper hand positions and material preparation. Then guides learner through attempts, correcting errors, and offering encouragement through many failures before first success occurs. This teaching investment takes hours or even days of dedicated attention from experienced practitioner who could be doing other productive activities. This demonstrates that fire knowledge transmission requires social structures supporting teaching and cultural values, prioritizing knowledge transmission over individual short-term productivity. First successes often result from teacher assistance, perhaps providing optimal materials or helping maintain proper technique. Independent success requires additional practice extending over weeks or months before a learner can reliably create fire alone under good conditions. Achieving success under difficult conditions like damp weather or with suboptimal materials might require years of experience. Fire making represents genuine craft requiring substantial practice investment rather than simple skill learned in single afternoon. The bow drill represents mechanical refinement of hand drill principle using curved wooden bow with string or leather cord wrapped once around drill stick. This allows practitioner to move bow back and forth horizontally rather than spinning stick directly between palms. This mechanical advantage provides several benefits simultaneously that make bow drill more reliable than hand drill for most practitioners. The bow motion maintains more consistent rotation speed through longer stroke length compared to hand spinning, which slows as palms slide down stick. The string gripping drill provides positive engagement, preventing slipping, that reduces friction efficiency in hand drill. The practitioner's other hand holds stone or wooden socket that presses down on top of drill, while the hand-pulling bow remains fresh, rather than having to perform both rotation and pressure functions together. This separates roles between hands and reduces fatigue that causes hand drill attempts to fail just before success. The sustained effort possible with bow drill means friction point reaches and maintains ignition temperature more reliably than hand drill, which often fails due to technique degradation as practitioner tires. This makes bow drill preferred method for most people once they learn to construct and use the bow assembly properly, though hand drill remains valuable for situations where bow materials aren't available or when traveling light without carrying specialized equipment. The bow drill requires more preparation than hand drill. The bow itself must be carved from naturally curved branch and strung with cordage or leather thong. The drill stick must be carefully sized and shaped with smoothly rounded ends. The fireboard prepared with starting depression positioned near edge where notch will be cut. The hand socket formed from stone with natural depression or hardwood shaped to fit comfortably in palm. The string must be exactly correct tension, tight enough to grip drill firmly, but loose enough to allow it to spin rather than binding. Each element requires attention to detail and proper preparation. When properly prepared and skillfully operated, bow drill can produce ember in perhaps 60 to 90 seconds of sustained effort rather than the 3 to 5 minutes required for hand drill. While friction fire develops in many regions and becomes primary fire creation method for groups who master it, another ignition technique emerges from observation of sparks created when certain stones strike together. Particularly flint striking against iron pyrite, the collision produces tiny glowing particles that fly from impact point at temperatures around 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to ignite properly prepared tinder, even though sparks are so small and brief-lived, they would seem incapable of starting fire to someone unfamiliar with the technique. This percussion method requires completely different knowledge and materials than friction fire. Not any stones create sparks when struck together, only specific mineral types with particular crystalline structure and hardness relationships produce the effect. The tinder must be even more carefully prepared than for friction fire. Sparks are smaller and shorter-lived than friction-created embers, requiring almost instant catching, or they cool below ignition temperature before transferring heat to fuel material. The discovery that flint and pyrite create sparks probably comes from observing sparks during stone tool manufacture when flint is struck to create flakes for tool edges. This observation must be connected with realization that those sparks are hot enough to start fire and that appropriate tinder material can catch them. Connections that seem obvious when stated directly, but represent significant cognitive leap from noticing phenomenon to understanding its potential application to developing practical exploitation method. The best tinder for catching percussion sparks is char cloth, fabric burned in oxygen-limited environment until it becomes completely black and carbonized but doesn't ash completely. This material has property of catching spark very readily and holding small coal that can then be transferred to finer tinder nest for flame development. Though char cloth represents relatively advanced fire technology requiring fire to create the material used to start fire, creating bootstrap problem that means percussion fire probably developed first using natural tinder materials before char cloth refinement improved reliability significantly. Creating char cloth requires placing fabric scraps in sealed container with small vent hole, heating container in fire until smoke stops emerging from vent, indicating carbonization is complete. Then, allowing container to cool before opening. The process transforms fabric into material that catches slightest spark and holds ember for minutes if needed, making fire starting much more reliable than using raw natural tinders that require perfect technique and optimal conditions to work consistently. Alternative spark-catching materials include amadou fungus, specifically dried and processed inner layer of bracket fungi that grows on dead trees. This material is prepared by removing outer skin, boiling to soften, pounding flat, drying completely, and sometimes treating with saltpeter solution to improve spark-catching ability. This creates material that catches and holds ember similarly to char cloth, though requiring different processing techniques and representing significant investment in fire-making tool preparation. This demonstrates how important reliable fire access becomes once fire control is established. Another natural spark catcher is dried thistledown, or various plant materials that have extremely fine dry fibers, creating large surface area for small spark to contact. Though these require more skill to use successfully because spark must land directly in material rather than near it. Even successful catch requires immediate transfer to more substantial tinder before tiny ember dies. Natural tinders are more challenging than prepared materials, but have advantage of being available without requiring advanced preparation when traveling or when prepared materials aren't available. The percussion fire-making technique involves holding piece of flint firmly in one hand, often between thumb and fingers, with striking edge positioned to allow clearance for pyrite to strike at correct angle without fingers blocking impact zone. The other hand holds iron pyrite stone or steel striker if available, bringing it down in quick glancing blow against flint edge so impact is angled rather than perpendicular. This angle is important because direct perpendicular impact doesn't shear material necessary to create sparks, but rather just crushes stone without producing the scraping action that generates hot particles. The properly angled strike scrapes tiny particles of iron from pyrite surface. These particles ignite from friction heat during scraping action, flying away as glowing sparks that can ignite prepared tinder if they land in it while still hot enough. The entire interaction lasts fraction of a second, requiring precise timing and positioning to direct sparks toward tinder rather than scattering them uselessly into air or onto ground where they cool instantly. The prepared tinder, whether char cloth or amadou or plant down, is positioned immediately next to or sometimes partially under flint edge, so sparks fall directly onto it rather than having to fly through air where they cool rapidly. When spark lands successfully in tinder, creating visible red glow in material, the glowing point is immediately encouraged by gentle blowing to spread through char cloth or fungus until it becomes substantial enough ember to transfer to fine tinder nest. The sequence continues similarly to friction fire, the ember growing in nest with continued careful blowing until flame appears and can be transferred to kindling arrangement. The percussion method, once mastered, can produce ember faster than friction methods, perhaps 30 seconds from first strike to usable ember rather than minute or more required for bow drill. This makes it preferred method when appropriate stones are available and practitioner has developed the skill and possesses prepared tinder materials that make technique reliable. Though it requires different materials and techniques that aren't always accessible in all environments or to all groups. Both percussion and friction methods continue being practiced in different contexts based on material availability and cultural knowledge transmission patterns. Finding suitable stones for percussion fire requires knowledge of mineral properties and ability to recognize correct stone types in natural settings where multiple rock types exist intermixed. Flint and chert are relatively common in some regions, but absent in others where different geological conditions prevail. Flint is recognizable by its fine-grained texture, conchoidal fracture pattern when broken, and typically dark coloration, though color varies. The stone has sharp edges when fractured, making it dangerous to handle carelessly, but providing the hard, sharp, striking surface needed for spark generation. Iron pyrite is identifiable by its metallic luster and golden color, often called fool's gold, due to superficial resemblance to actual gold, though pyrite is much lighter and more brittle than gold would be. The stone occurs in cubic crystals or massive formations in various geological contexts. Steel, when available, works better than pyrite for spark generation, producing more abundant sparks with less effort. Though steel availability is limited to periods and places where metalworking exists, meaning natural pyrite represents primary percussion fire material for most of human prehistory. The striking technique requires practice to develop consistency because angle and force and follow-through all affect spark production significantly. Too shallow angle produces few sparks, while too steep angle doesn't create proper scraping action. Too light strike produces weak sparks that die quickly, while too heavy strike damages stones without proportionally increasing useful spark production. The ideal strike combines firm, decisive force with controlled follow-through that directs sparks toward tinder placement. The motion becomes automatic with practice, so practitioner can produce reliable sparks repeatedly without conscious attention to technical details. Hand positioning must protect fingers from sharp flint edges while allowing firm grip that doesn't shift during impact. Tinder positioning must balance accessibility for sparks with protection from being knocked away by striking motion. These multiple requirements create coordination challenge that explains why percussion fire, despite appearing simpler than friction fire, requires substantial practice to master reliably. Different flint pieces produce different spark quantities and qualities based on their specific composition and edge sharpness. Experienced practitioners learn to recognize superior spark-producing stones and keep them as valued possessions, sometimes carrying favorite flint pieces long distances rather than searching for new stones in unfamiliar territory where stone quality is unknown. The discovery that fire can be transported in forms other than continuous flame represents another crucial advancement in fire control. This solves problem that starting fire from scratch, whether by friction or percussion, requires significant time and effort that becomes problematic when Homo Sapiens groups are traveling or when weather conditions make fire starting difficult or impossible. Maintaining continuous burning fire during travel would require carrying substantial fuel and protecting flame from wind and rain, practical difficulties that severely limit mobility. But if fire can be transported in dormant state that doesn't require continuous feeding and can be revived when needed, then fire becomes truly portable rather than location dependent. This transforms fire from stationary resource requiring settlement around it to mobile tool that accompanies people wherever they go. The simplest fire transport method uses coals themselves, specifically selecting pieces that have burned down to charcoal consistency, but remain glowing internally. These coals are placed in container that allows minimal air circulation to prevent flaming combustion while keeping coal temperature high enough that it doesn't die completely. The container is filled partially with dry ash or sand that insulates coal and protects it from jarring that might break it apart or expose it to excessive air that would cause it to burn too quickly. This coal-containing vessel can be carried for hours while remaining viable for fire restart. The carrier periodically checks that coal remains warm and adjusts conditions if necessary by adding more insulation or allowing slightly more air if coal seems to be dying. When fire is needed, the coal is removed from protective container, placed in tinder nest, and blown to encourage it back into flame exactly as with newly created ember. This method allows fire transport across significant distances and through weather conditions that would extinguish open flame. Though it requires attention and care to maintain coal temperature without allowing it to either die completely or burst into flame that would consume container. The container itself can be made from various materials, including large shells, sections of bamboo or hollow wood, folded bark, or later ceramic vessels. Each material offers different advantages regarding heat resistance and air circulation control and durability. Container selection and preparation becomes part of fire transport technology that develops through experimentation with different materials and designs. More sophisticated fire transport uses specific fungal materials, particularly amadou fungus prepared through same process used for spark catching, but in this application used differently. A piece of prepared fungus is ignited and allowed to establish glowing combustion throughout its interior structure. Then air is restricted by wrapping in leaves or bark or placing in containers so fungus burns internally at very slow rate, sometimes taking hours to consume just an inch of fungus length. This slow-burning fungus can be carried for an entire day or even multiple days while maintaining its internal combustion. It requires only occasional checking to ensure it hasn't died or burned too quickly. When fire is needed, the slow-burning fungus is blown upon to increase combustion rate and used to ignite tinder exactly as ember created by friction or percussion. This method is particularly valuable for groups traveling through wet conditions where starting new fire would be difficult or impossible. The internally burning fungus is relatively resistant to external moisture as long as outer surface doesn't become completely saturated. Fire can be maintained through conditions that would prevent fire creation using friction or percussion methods. Some groups develop specialized containers for fungus transport. Carved wooden tubes with fitted caps that control airflow precisely, or folded bark containers that protect fungus from weather while allowing minimal air circulation needed to maintain combustion. These containers represent dedicated fire transport technology, showing how important portable fire becomes once its advantages are recognized. The containers often have adjustable vents that can be opened when fungus burns too slowly or closed when it burns too quickly. This allows real-time adjustment of combustion rate during transport to match conditions and ensure fungus lasts for intended journey duration. Having reliable fire access at any location and under any conditions dramatically improves survival capability. Fire provides so many crucial benefits. Allowing camps to be established with confidence that warmth and cooking fire will be available immediately, even if weather prevents fresh fire creation. This eliminates need to maintain continuous fire during travel, which would require significant fuel carrying and constant attention that limits other activities. The knowledge required for successful fire transport includes understanding which coal types maintain temperature longest, how much insulation optimizes survival without smothering, what containers work best for different conditions, how to judge coal viability without exposing it to excessive air, and how to revive seemingly dead coal that retains just enough heat to restart with proper technique. Different wood types produce coals with different persistence characteristics. Hardwood coals generally last longer than softwood coals. Coal size matters, with larger coals maintaining temperature longer but being harder to fully ignite initially, while smaller coals ignite easily but cool quickly. The ash or sand insulation must be dry because moist insulation draws heat away from coal, cooling it below survival threshold. Even detail like insulation moisture affects success. Container size and shape affect air circulation patterns. Deeper, narrower containers restrict air more than shallow, wide containers. Opening size or vent arrangements allow fine-tuning of air supply to match coal type and transport duration. Checking coal condition during transport requires careful technique to avoid cooling it excessively. A quick peek or gentle blow to see if glow brightens is preferable to removing coal completely, which exposes it to excessive air and temperature loss. Experienced fire carriers develop sense for how coal should feel through container wall. Warm but not hot indicates good condition. They judge how weight should feel as coal gradually consumes and becomes lighter. Sudden lightness indicates coal has burned completely and is now just ash requiring restart from new coal. The timing of coal preparation matters too. Starting with properly established coal bed that has reached charcoal stage rather than attempting to transport coal that is still partially unburned wood. Unburned wood doesn't maintain temperature as reliably and tends to either flame up, consuming itself quickly, or die completely, rather than maintaining steady glow needed for successful transport. Banking fire overnight represents related technique that shares principles with fire transport. This solves problem that maintaining continuous burning through night requires person to wake periodically to add fuel. Sleep interruption reduces rest quality and energy conservation, but allowing fire to die completely means morning requires time and effort for restart before warmth and breakfast fire are available. Banking technique provides middle solution where fire is reduced to coal state that maintains itself through night without feeding or tending, then can be revived in morning with much less effort than starting completely fresh fire. The banking process involves allowing fire to burn down naturally until substantial coal bed exists without much active flame. Then using stick or stone to arrange coals into compact pile or mound rather than scattered pattern. This concentration reduces exposed surface area and thus slows heat loss while concentrating remaining heat in smaller volume that maintains temperature better than dispersed coals would. The coal mound is then covered with several inches of ash from fire's periphery, where ash has accumulated during evening's burning. This ash layer acts as insulation that prevents air circulation that would either accelerate burning or cool coals to extinction temperature. This creates conditions where coals maintain temperature through night by metabolically burning remaining fuel extremely slowly. Sometimes 6 or 8 or even 10 hours, depending on initial coal quantity and ash insulation thickness and external temperature. In morning, the ash layer is carefully swept away using stick or hands, revealing coals that may not be visibly glowing, but remain hot enough to readily accept tinder and blow into flame. Fire's transformation of food represents perhaps its most profound impact on human evolution and daily life. This fundamentally alters not just diet, but human biology itself over thousands of generations through changes in digestive efficiency and energy availability that cascade through every aspect of human physiology and behavior. Cooking is possibly the single most important application of fire control in terms of its long-term effects on human development, even though other fire applications like warmth and protection seem more immediately dramatic and essential. Raw plant foods, particularly roots and tubers that form a significant part of diet in many environments, contain nutrients locked within tough cellulose cell walls that human digestive system breaks down poorly. Even lengthy chewing and sustained digestion extracts only fraction of available calories from raw roots. Much of the material passes through digestive system without being fully processed. But cooking these plants breaks down cellulose walls through heat application. The thermal energy disrupts molecular bonds that hold cell walls together. This transforms fibrous, difficult-to-digest materials into soft, easily digestible foods that yield their calories readily during digestion. The nutritional value obtained from identical quantity of food increases by 30 to 50%, depending on plant type and cooking duration and method. An improvement in efficiency so substantial that it changes fundamental calculations about foraging return rates and time investment needed to obtain adequate nutrition for survival and reproduction. Similarly, meat proteins benefit dramatically from cooking because heat denatures complex protein molecules. This unfolds their twisted three-dimensional structures into simpler, linearized forms that human digestive enzymes can access and process much more efficiently than tightly folded raw protein structures that resist enzyme action and pass through digestive system partially undigested. This protein denaturation increases caloric extraction from same quantity of meat by similar 30 to 50% improvement seen in plant cooking, while simultaneously killing parasites and bacteria that might cause disease or food poisoning. Cooked meat is both more nutritious and safer than raw flesh that poses significant health risks from parasitic infection and bacterial contamination that cooking heat eliminates through thermal destruction of organisms and toxins. The combined effect of improved caloric extraction and reduced disease risk from cooked food creates powerful survival advantage. Groups with reliable cooking access obtain more nutrition and experience less illness from identical food resources compared to groups eating same foods raw. These improvements in digestive efficiency created cascading effects throughout human biology. They reduced time required for chewing from the 5 to 6 hours daily that wild primates like chimpanzees spend processing raw plant materials with their powerful jaws and large teeth to perhaps 1 to 2 hours that humans eating predominantly cooked food need for same caloric intake. This frees 3 to 4 hours every single day for other activities, including tool making, social interaction, travel to distant foraging areas, and the extended teaching and learning periods that characterize human cultural transmission. This allows accumulated knowledge to pass between generations more effectively than would be possible if most of each day was spent just chewing food. This freed time represents enormous productivity increase, allowing human groups to accomplish more diverse activities and develop more complex skills and knowledge systems than would be possible if chewing occupied most of waking hours, as it does for great apes eating raw food diets. Simultaneously, cooking reduced energy requirements for digestion itself. Raw food demands large energy-intensive digestive system with long intestines and powerful stomach acids and substantial enzyme production to extract nutrients from tough plant materials and raw meat that resist breakdown. Cooked food pre-digests through heat application before entering body, requiring less gut length and less digestive energy to process effectively. This allows human digestive system to shrink over evolutionary time while still providing adequate nutrition. Critically, this frees metabolic energy that could redirect to other organs, particularly the brain, which uses roughly 20% of human caloric intake despite representing only 2% of body weight. An energy demand that would be difficult or impossible to meet without increased digestive efficiency that cooking provides by reducing energy cost of obtaining and processing food. Archaeological and fossil evidence suggests that brain size increase in human ancestors correlates temporally and geographically with evidence of fire use and presumed food cooking. This implies that fire didn't just make food more palatable or convenient, but actually made possible the large, energy-expensive brains that characterize Homo sapiens and distinguish our species from other primates with similar body sizes but much smaller brains. The cooking process itself requires knowledge that accumulates through experience and gets transmitted as cultural information between generations. Different foods require different cooking approaches to optimize nutritional value and palatability without destroying nutrients through overcooking or making food unpalatable through undercooking. Improper cooking can create unpleasant textures or flavors that reduce food consumption even when nutritional value is preserved. Learning what works represents important skill development that contributes to group survival success. Root vegetables cook well when placed directly in coals at fire edge or buried in ash-covered coals. Their exterior chars, while interior steams in its own moisture, creating pressure cooker effect. The charred skin peels away after cooking to reveal soft, cooked flesh inside. This method is simple and effective, though it requires judging doneness through experience since internal condition isn't visible during cooking. Overcooked tubers become dry and unpleasant, while undercooked ones remain hard and difficult to digest. Meat cooks through several different methods, each producing different results. Either suspended above fire on wooden frame or stake, so heat and smoke reach it without direct flame contact. This indirect cooking prevents surface burning while allowing thorough heat penetration, or placed on heated stones that cook through surface contact, providing even consistent heat that sears exterior while cooking interior through conduction, or buried with heated stones in pit that creates enclosed cooking environment where heat circulates around food, cooking it from all sides simultaneously while moisture retention prevents drying. Each method produces different textures and flavors. Suspended smoking creates firm texture with smoky flavor. Stone contact cooking creates seared exterior with juicy interior. Pit cooking creates very tender, falling apart texture. Different meat cuts benefit from different cooking approaches. Tough meat with much connective tissue needs long, slow cooking that breaks down collagen into gelatin, creating tender texture. Tender cuts need only brief high heat that browns surface while keeping interior moist and not overcooked. Seeds and grains require different cooking approach than vegetables or meat. They need moisture addition and sustained moderate heat to soften their structure and make starches digestible. Sometimes achieved through boiling in containers when waterproof vessels become available through pottery technology or basket weaving with waterproof coating. Other times through mixing ground seeds with water to create paste, then cooking on heated stones. The paste spreads thin so heat penetrates throughout and cooks starches that would remain hard and indigestible if eaten raw or merely heated without moisture. The cooking transforms hard, indigestible seeds into soft, nourishing foods that form major part of diet in regions where seeds are abundant and accessible through harvesting wild grasses and other seed-producing plants. Fish and shellfish cook quickly compared to meat or vegetables. Their proteins denature at lower temperatures and their flesh becomes opaque and flakes easily when done. This makes them relatively easy to cook successfully, but also easy to overcook into dry or rubbery consistency if left in heat too long. The biological changes in human populations that result from cooking adoption are subtle enough that they occur only over many generations, spanning thousands of years, but significant enough that they become visible in fossil record through progressive anatomical modifications that distinguish cooking-enabled humans from their raw food-eating ancestors. This demonstrates that cultural innovation like cooking can drive biological evolution when cultural practice becomes sufficiently reliable and universal that anatomy can adapt to depend on it, rather than maintaining redundant capacity to fully process raw food that cooking makes unnecessary. Modern human jaws are substantially smaller than those of pre-fire human ancestors visible in fossil skulls. The jaw reduction represents adaptation to cooked food that requires less chewing force and duration. Smaller jaws experience no survival disadvantage in environment where cooked food predominates and actually offer advantages through reduced growth requirements and maintenance costs. Whereas in raw food environment, smaller jaws would mean reduced chewing efficiency and thus reduced nutritional intake and lower reproductive success. This creates strong selection pressure, maintaining large jaws in raw food eating populations. Similarly, modern human teeth show reduced size and wear patterns compared to ancestral populations, consistent with diet requiring less chewing force. The tooth reduction occurs because large teeth aren't necessary for processing cooked food that is softer and requires less mechanical breakdown before swallowing. Maintaining unnecessarily large teeth requires developmental resources and jaw space that could be allocated elsewhere more productively once cooking makes large teeth superfluous for dietary processing. The tooth wear patterns visible on fossil teeth show dramatic differences between pre-cooking and post-cooking populations. Earlier fossils show heavy wear consistent with processing tough fibrous foods requiring extensive chewing. Later fossils show reduced wear, suggesting softer diet requiring less mechanical processing. This wear pattern change correlates with archaeological evidence of fire use and appears in same populations and time periods where hearths and burned bones indicate regular cooking. Human digestive tract shows evidence of reduction over evolutionary time compared to other primates of similar body size, particularly shortening of intestines and reduction in gut volume compared to chimpanzees and gorillas that eat primarily raw plant material and need extensive digestive systems to extract sufficient nutrition from fibrous, low-quality foods. This gut reduction is consistent with diet that requires less digestion and nutrient extraction effort because cooking does much of the breakdown before food enters body. This essentially outsources digestion to external fire-driven process that pre-digests food before consumption. It allows internal digestion to be shorter and less energy-intensive while still obtaining adequate nutrition. The energy saved through reduced gut size contributes to energy budget, allowing larger brain development. Both gut and brain are metabolically expensive organs competing for limited energy resources. Cooking allows shrinking one, which frees resources for expanding the other. These biological changes don't happen suddenly when fire control appears, but rather accumulate gradually over very long periods as cooking becomes reliable enough that biology can adapt to depend on it rather than maintaining redundant capacity to fully process raw food. The transition likely takes thousands of generations and occurs at different rates in different populations based on how completely and reliably they adopted cooking versus continuing to consume significant quantities of raw food. The changes are visible in fossil record as gradual trends rather than sudden shifts. Jaw size declines progressively over time. Tooth size reduces gradually across successive populations. Gut proportions shift slowly toward modern human configuration. Each generation shows slightly more adaptation to cooked food diet than previous generation. The cumulative effect over many generations produces dramatic differences between earliest and latest populations, but with continuous gradation rather than discrete steps. The brain size increase in human lineage correlates temporally with evidence of fire use and cooking adoption, suggesting causal relationship where cooking enabled brain expansion through improved energy availability and reduced energy costs of digestion. Though establishing definitive causation from fossil evidence is challenging because correlation doesn't prove causation, and multiple factors could contribute to brain expansion. However, the energetic argument is compelling. Brain tissue is metabolically very expensive. Adult human brain consumes roughly 20% of resting metabolic energy, despite being only 2% of body weight. Supporting this expensive organ requires either dramatically increased food intake or increased efficiency in extracting energy from food. Cooking provides exactly this efficiency improvement, making brain expansion energetically feasible where it would be problematic or impossible on raw food diet. The brain size increase isn't uniform across all populations or time periods, but shows general trend toward larger brains associated with fire-using populations compared to earlier non-fire-using ancestors, with substantial variability based on local conditions and specific population histories. Some populations show rapid brain expansion correlating with evidence of intensive fire use and cooking, while others show slower increase, suggesting less complete cooking adoption or different subsistence strategies affecting energy availability. The correlation between cooking and brain expansion holds across multiple human lineages and geographical regions, suggesting robust relationship rather than coincidental pattern. The energetic logic supporting causal relationship is strong enough that most researchers accept cooking as major factor enabling human brain expansion, even if not sole cause. Other biological changes potentially related to cooking include reduction in jaw muscle size and attachment points visible in skull structure, changes in tooth enamel thickness, suggesting different dietary stresses, modifications in digestive enzyme production potentially reflecting adaptation to cooked food chemistry, and possibly changes in throat structure and breathing patterns, though these soft tissue features don't preserve in fossils, making them difficult to study directly. The jaw muscle changes are particularly interesting because they affect skull shape substantially. Earlier humans have large muscles requiring prominent attachment crests on skull, while Homo sapiens have smaller muscles allowing different skull proportions that may have been necessary for brain expansion by removing mechanical constraints on cranial growth. The cumulative effect of these biological changes is that Homo sapiens are thoroughly adapted to cooked food diet and would struggle substantially if forced to rely entirely on raw foods. Our small jaws and teeth and reduced digestive system are optimized for cooked food processing and work poorly for raw food diet that our ancestors could handle effectively. Experiments with modern humans attempting to live on raw food diets show substantial weight loss and difficulty maintaining adequate caloric intake despite abundant food availability. This demonstrates that we are biologically dependent on cooking in ways our ancestors were not. The cultural innovation has driven biological changes that make the cultural practice necessary rather than optional. This dependence on cultural practice represents interesting evolutionary dynamic where culture and biology interact. Cultural innovation enables biological change that then reinforces dependence on cultural practice, creating positive feedback loop where cooking enabled anatomical changes that made cooking increasingly necessary for survival. The time depth of cooking adoption is debated, with some evidence suggesting fire control dates back several 100,000 years, while definitive evidence of regular cooking is more recent. The biological changes associated with cooking adoption occurred over different timescales, with some changes appearing relatively quickly, while others accumulated slowly over many generations. The expansion of human geographic range into cold climates far beyond tropical and subtropical regions where human ancestors originated represents another fundamental transformation enabled by fire control. Without fire providing warmth during cold seasons, and particularly during nights when temperatures drop far below what unclothed human body can tolerate, permanent habitation in regions experiencing freezing temperatures would be impossible, regardless of other adaptations or technologies. But with reliable fire, Homo sapiens can create warm microclimates within shelters even when external environment is lethally cold. This enables survival and reproduction in environments that would otherwise be completely inhospitable to tropical primate descended from African origins where year-round warmth made fire less critical for basic survival. This geographic expansion is visible in archaeological record as human sites appear progressively further north and at higher elevations over time, correlating with evidence of increasingly sophisticated fire use and control. Fire mastery enabled territorial expansion that vastly increased available habitat and resources accessible to human populations, allowing population growth and geographic dispersal that wouldn't be possible without fire's warming capabilities. The warmth fire provides isn't merely comfort or convenience, but survival necessity in cold environments. Human body at rest generates insufficient heat to maintain core temperature when external temperature drops below approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on wind speed and humidity and individual metabolism. Without external heat source, humans in cold climates would need to remain physically active continuously to generate metabolic heat through movement. This prevents rest and sleep and exhausts energy reserves rapidly, or they would need insulation so extensive it prevents mobility and fine motor control necessary for tool use and food acquisition. Fire provides stationary heat source that allows people to rest, sleep, work on detailed tasks requiring steady hands, and care for infants and children who generate less metabolic heat than adults and thus are particularly vulnerable to cold exposure that could cause hypothermia and death within hours in severe conditions. The fire-warmed shelter creates an environment where specific activities become possible that wouldn't be feasible in cold conditions without artificial heating. Detailed tool manufacturing requires careful handwork that cold-numbed fingers couldn't perform with necessary precision. Processing of plant materials into cordage or basketry requires flexibility in fibers that cold makes brittle and unworkable. Hide processing requires working leather, while it's soft and pliable, rather than frozen stiff. Social activities like teaching and storytelling require people sitting relatively still for extended periods, rather than moving continuously to generate warmth through physical activity. Fire doesn't just prevent death from exposure, but enables the full range of human cultural activities, even in environments that would otherwise prevent or severely limit them. This allows cold climate populations to develop complex cultures and technologies comparable to warm climate populations rather than being limited to minimal survival activities focused entirely on staying warm and finding food. The duration of fire need varies dramatically with season and climate. Groups in moderate climates perhaps need fire only overnight and during occasional cold periods, while groups in severe climates require continuous fire throughout winter months, lasting half the year or more. This creates vastly different fuel demands and fire management challenges. Maintaining continuous fire through months-long winter requires either enormous fuel stockpiling accomplished during warmer months when collection is easier, or ongoing fuel gathering even during difficult weather conditions with deep snow and extreme cold, making collection dangerous and exhausting. Both approaches demand substantial labor investment and planning that wouldn't be necessary in warmer climates where fire needs are intermittent. Fire control and climate adaptation create interconnected challenges that require sophisticated social organization and resource management to solve successfully. Groups must coordinate fuel gathering efforts, maintain adequate stockpiles, organize fire tending responsibilities, and plan ahead for entire winter season rather than responding to immediate needs. This represents organizational complexity that distinguishes Homo sapiens from other species. Drying of wet materials represents another survival-critical fire application in cold, wet climates. Wet clothing or bedding in cold environment becomes serious liability rather than providing insulation. It actually draws heat from body through evaporative cooling and prevents formation of warm air layers that dry insulation traps. The combination of wet and cold creates hypothermia risk far greater than either condition alone would pose. Placing wet materials near fire allows evaporation of moisture through sustained, gentle heat without scorching or burning materials. This restores their insulating properties and prevents the hypothermia risk that wet insulation creates. This drying capability becomes essential during extended wet periods when everything becomes damp and without fire, no effective drying method exists. Similarly, wet fire-starting materials can sometimes be dried near established fire, so they become usable for future fire maintenance. This allows continuous fire access even during extended wet periods when finding naturally dry tinder would be difficult or impossible in an environment where everything exposed to weather becomes saturated. The drying application extends beyond immediate survival needs to food preservation. Certain foods can be dried through sustained exposure to fire heat and smoke, removing moisture that would otherwise allow decay through bacterial and fungal action. This transforms perishable foods into preserved foods that remain edible for weeks or months without refrigeration, creating food storage capability that enables survival through seasons when fresh food is scarce or unavailable. Meat dried into jerky through smoking and low heat exposure can last many months if kept dry, providing protein source during winter when hunting may be difficult or impossible due to weather conditions and animal scarcity. Fish, similarly, can be smoke-dried, creating preserved food that sustains coastal and riverine populations through lean seasons. Plant foods also benefit from drying. Roots and berries and seeds maintain nutritional value while becoming resistant to spoilage. The preservation enables accumulation of food supplies that buffer against seasonal scarcity and periodic failures of particular food sources. Winter survival in extreme cold climates represents ultimate test of fire control mastery. Failure to maintain fire during severe cold spell can mean death for entire group within days or even hours if temperatures drop to extreme levels, while wind creates additional cooling through convective heat loss. Groups must maintain fire continuously through winter, banking it overnight and reviving it each morning, protecting it from wind and moisture, ensuring adequate fuel supply lasts through entire season, and having backup fire starting capability in case main fire somehow dies despite precautions. The social organization required for winter fire maintenance includes assigning responsibility for overnight fire tending, coordinating fuel gathering among group members so burden doesn't fall entirely on single individuals, teaching fire skills to multiple people so knowledge isn't lost if primary firekeeper becomes ill or injured, and maintaining discipline around fire safety so that heat source essential for survival doesn't become danger through careless handling that causes shelter fires or burns. The psychological impact of reliable warmth shouldn't be underestimated. Chronic cold stress affects mental state and decision-making ability. People who are constantly cold become irritable and depressed and less capable of complex thought and planning. Those who have access to warmth can maintain psychological stability and cognitive function necessary for the planning and cooperation that ensure continued survival. Protection from predators represents fire's most immediately obvious survival benefit beyond warmth and cooking. Nighttime darkness renders Homo sapiens vulnerable to predatory animals that hunt primarily by scent and sound rather than depending on vision. Animals including cave lions, hyenas, cave bears, and wolves are larger, stronger, faster, and better armed with teeth and claws than humans. Without defensive measures, humans would be prey animals rather than apex predators themselves, spending nights in constant fear and frequent danger from carnivores that see darkness as hunting opportunity. Fire provides defense not through any offensive capability, but simply through the fact that most large predators instinctively avoid fire. Perhaps animals that approached fire too closely in evolutionary history suffered burns that created learned or instinctive avoidance behavior passed through generations. Or perhaps fire's appearance, sound, and smoke trigger predator uncertainty and caution, making them unwilling to cross into fire-illuminated area where human group shelters. The exact mechanism is less important than reliable effect, that fire deters predators effectively enough that humans with fire can sleep safely in locations where without fire they would be killed regularly. The psychological transformation this protection enables is profound and easily underestimated from modern perspective, where predation risk is essentially eliminated through civilization and technology. Instead of spending nights in constant alert vigilance, listening for danger sounds and ready to flee or defend at any moment, humans with fire can relax enough to achieve deep restorative sleep absolutely necessary for physical recovery and cognitive function. They can attend to non-survival activities like tool making and teaching during evening hours rather than maintaining constant guard. They can allow children to move freely within camp without constant supervision against predator attack. They can occupy shelters in locations that offer other advantages like water access or good foraging, even if they wouldn't be defensible without fire's protective presence, creating safe zone in otherwise dangerous environment. The boundary fire creates between human territory and wilderness isn't physical barrier that predators couldn't cross if sufficiently motivated, but rather psychological barrier that makes crossing unappealing even to hungry predators that might otherwise see humans as potential prey. This creates zone where humans operate with confidence and predators with uncertainty, inversion of normal predator-prey dynamic, where humans would be uncertain and vulnerable, while predators would be confident and aggressive. This confidence enables not just survival, but all the higher-level human activities that require mental focus and sustained attention, rather than constant vigilance for threats. Brain functioning at constant high alert depletes cognitive resources that could otherwise be used for planning, remembering, innovating, and teaching. Fire doesn't just prevent predation, but frees mental capacity for the distinctively human cognitive activities that eventually produce complex culture, sophisticated technology, and accumulated knowledge systems that characterize human societies. The evidence that fire provides effective protection comes partly from absence of evidence. Archaeological sites showing fire use generally lack evidence of predation on human remains in contexts where predation would be expected without fire protection. This suggests that humans occupying fire-protected sites experience dramatically lower predation rates than unprotected populations would have encountered. This creates survival advantage that contributes to fire's rapid adoption wherever humans operate in environments where large predators pose significant threat to human safety. Some sites show evidence of careful fire placement near shelter entrances or at strategic points around camp perimeter, suggesting deliberate use of fire as defensive barrier. The positioning demonstrates understanding of fire's protective function and intentional exploitation of that function through thoughtful fire management, extending beyond simple having fire to strategically deploying fire for maximum protective effect. Smaller dangers also receive deterrence from fire, though through different mechanisms than large predator intimidation. Insects like mosquitoes and biting flies find smoke irritating and tend to avoid smoke-filled areas. This reduces disease transmission from insect-borne pathogens and reduces discomfort that blood-feeding insects cause through their bites. Snakes and small mammalian predators avoid fire heat and light, keeping them distant from human sleeping and activity areas where they might otherwise pose bite risks or food theft problems. These smaller benefits accumulate into substantial quality of life improvements. Even non-lethal dangers create stress, interrupt sleep, cause infections through bites and wounds, and generally degrade health in ways that reduce overall survival and reproductive success over time. The comprehensive protection fire provides, from deterring large predators through excluding biting insects to providing visual detection of any approaching threats through illumination that reveals movement in darkness, combines to create security environment that transforms human nighttime experience from vulnerability to relative safety. This change appears in evidence of increasingly complex nighttime activities at sites where fire was reliably available compared to sites without clear fire evidence. The social implications of fire protection extend beyond immediate safety to enabling larger group sizes and different social organizations. Without fire protection, group size would be limited by defensive considerations, requiring enough alert individuals to maintain watch through night. With fire protection, these defensive requirements relax, allowing groups to grow larger and organize around other factors like resource availability and kinship relationships, rather than being constrained primarily by security needs. Larger groups provide various advantages, including more diverse skills and knowledge, better ability to coordinate complex activities like large game hunting, more robust social networks providing support during individual hardships, and genetic benefits from larger mating pools. But these advantages can only be realized if predation doesn't eliminate the benefits through excessive mortality. fire protection reduces predation sufficiently that larger groups become viable rather than being eliminated by predators attracted to concentrations of potential prey. The nighttime fire maintenance requirements create social roles and responsibilities. Someone must tend fire through night to ensure it doesn't die, leaving group vulnerable. This fire tending often rotates among group members or is assigned to individuals whose sleep needs are less demanding. Elderly people who naturally wake frequently during night are particularly suitable for fire tending role that contributes to group survival while accommodating their different sleep patterns. The fire tender role carries responsibility, but also provides opportunity for nighttime activities like tool making or hide working that can be accomplished in firelight while others sleep. This makes productive use of waking hours that would otherwise be simply waiting for morning. The social structure around fire maintenance demonstrates how fire control creates new social roles and relationships. The technology requires human organization and cooperation to function reliably rather than being a simple tool that individuals use independently. Children growing up with fire protection develop different psychology than children in constant predation danger would develop. The security enables childhood play and exploration that builds skills and knowledge without constant fear, suppressing curiosity and experimentation. It enables extended childhood learning period where young people can acquire complex skills through teaching and practice rather than needing to mature rapidly to defend themselves against threats. The protected childhood that fire enables may contribute to humans' unusual life history pattern with extended juvenile period before maturity. The prolonged development time allows acquisition of complex cultural knowledge that wouldn't be possible if children needed to become independent quickly for survival reasons. Fire protection thus potentially affects not just immediate survival, but human developmental patterns and learning capacities that distinguish us from other primates with faster maturation and shorter learning periods. The evening hours around fire become primary time for activities like basket weaving, cordage making, tool refinement, hide processing, and teaching that build culture and technology gradually through accumulated effort over many generations. The social transformations fire enables emerge from fire's tendency to create natural gathering place where Homo sapiens congregate for multiple practical and social reasons. Fire provides light, warmth, and protection in concentrated location, making it efficient for people to gather around single fire rather than dispersing to multiple locations where each person or small group would need their own fire, requiring separate fuel collection and tending effort. This gathering around fire creates opportunities for social interaction, bonding, and cultural transmission that wouldn't occur or would occur less intensely if people remained dispersed throughout day and night. The evening hours after darkness falls, but before sleep comes, represent crucial social time in fire-using human groups. This is the period when day's activities have ended and food has been consumed, and people sit together in fire's glow. During these evening hours, stories are told, experiences shared, skills taught, disputes resolved, relationships negotiated, and group identity reinforced through shared narratives and rituals that bind individuals into cohesive social unit capable of coordinated action and mutual support. The importance of this fire-centered social time is difficult to overstate from modern perspective, where social opportunities exist throughout day and evening through various settings and technologies. Humans are intensely social species whose survival and reproduction depend fundamentally on cooperative relationships and cultural knowledge transmission. The evening gathering creates reliable, regular context for the social and educational interactions that maintain those relationships and transmit that knowledge between generations and among group members. Without fire creating gathering space and extending useful hours beyond daylight, these social interactions would be compressed into daylight hours that must also accommodate food acquisition and other survival activities. This would leave insufficient time for the extended social engagement and teaching that characterize human cultural transmission, and allow each generation to build on previous knowledge rather than starting fresh. Storytelling around fire serves multiple functions simultaneously. It provides entertainment that makes evening hours pleasant rather than boring passage of time until sleep. Teaching that transmits practical knowledge about environment and skills needed for survival. Social bonding that reinforces group identity and individual relationships, creating solidarity necessary for cooperation. And transmission of values and beliefs that shape behavior and decision-making according to group norms and accumulated wisdom. The stories told around fire include accounts of recent events like successful hunts or dangerous encounters that help less experienced group members learn without experiencing danger directly. Teaching through vicarious experience about what strategies work and what dangers exist and how to respond to various situations that arise in environment and social context. These contemporary stories provide immediate practical education, helping young people and newcomers understand local conditions and group practices. Stories also include traditional narratives about ancestors, spirits, landscape features, and origins. Narratives that may combine factual information about geography or animal behavior with supernatural elements that encode moral teachings or explain mysterious phenomena that observation alone can't fully explain. This creates rich cultural knowledge that exists primarily in memory and speech, rather than physical artifacts that archaeologists can recover. These traditional stories maintain group identity across generations, connecting present individuals to past ancestors and future descendants through continuous narrative thread that provides sense of belonging and purpose. The stories often explain why a group does things certain way, or why particular locations are significant, or how relationships between groups originated. Information that shapes behavior and attitudes in ways that promote group cohesion and appropriate responses to social and environmental challenges. The archaeological evidence for storytelling comes partly from cave paintings and carved objects that may represent story elements or memory aids, helping storytellers recall complex narratives and their details. Though the stories themselves don't survive into archaeological record, making direct study impossible. And from ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups that demonstrate how central storytelling is to cultural transmission and social cohesion. This suggests that prehistoric groups likely engaged in similar practices given universal human capacity for narrative and obvious benefits that storytelling provides for group survival and cultural continuity. The cave paintings showing animals and human figures and abstract symbols may represent visual components of stories told repeatedly around fires. The images serve as prompts or illustrations that enhance oral narrative and make stories more memorable and engaging for listeners. This combination of visual and verbal communication creates a powerful mnemonic system that preserves cultural knowledge across generations without requiring written language. The extended evening hours that fire illumination enables represent expansion of effective daily activity time beyond what daylight alone would provide. Firelight, though dimmer than sunlight, provides sufficient illumination for many activities, including conversation, tool maintenance, hide working, cordage making, teaching, and other tasks that benefit from light but don't require daylight's full intensity for successful completion. This time extension means more hours available for productive activity, particularly during winter when daylight hours are shortest and when indoor time is longest due to cold weather, making outdoor activity uncomfortable or dangerous. This creates opportunity to accomplish more work and to invest more time in activities like teaching and learning that produce long-term benefits even though they don't provide immediate survival returns like food acquisition does. The evening hours also provide temporal separation from day's physically demanding activities. This creates psychological space that may encourage different thinking, more reflective and planning-oriented, and less immediately practical. Thinking that contributes to innovation and long-term planning rather than just executing established routines and responding to immediate needs. The combination of available time, social gathering creating intellectual exchange, reduced physical demands allowing mental focus, and firelight's unique quality creating particular ambiance creates conditions particularly favorable to the distinctively human cognitive activities that produce cultural elaboration and technological innovation through accumulation of small insights and improvements over many generations. The hearth as permanent feature and social center appears in archaeological record as sites show evidence of repeated fire use in same location across many occupation episodes. Accumulated ash deposits reach substantial depth. Fire-modified stones show thermal alteration from repeated heating. Organized activity areas are arranged around hearth location, suggesting that hearth position is chosen deliberately and maintained consistently rather than fire being built randomly wherever convenient at moment of need. The consistent hearth location creates organizational center for shelter interior. Activity areas are arranged relative to hearth based on their needs for light, warmth, or fire access. This creates structured living space rather than undifferentiated interior. This spatial organization reflects and reinforces social organization. Certain individuals or families occupy specific positions relative to hearth based on status, role, or preference. The spatial relationships encode social relationships in ways that make group structure visible and concrete. The evolution of hearth from simple fire location to symbolically significant social center represents cultural elaboration enabled by fire control becoming routine and reliable. Once fire becomes permanent feature rather than opportunistic temporary event, it can accumulate meaning beyond its practical functions. It becomes symbol of home, safety, group identity, and continuity across generations. Meanings that enhance its practical benefits and further motivate the labor investment fire maintenance requires. The hearth appears in language and symbolism across cultures as representing home and family and community. This suggests deep cultural significance that likely extends back to prehistoric origins of fire control. The hearth being literally the center of human social life for most of human history, before modern heating and lighting technologies decentralized domestic arrangements. The teaching that occurs around fire represents crucial knowledge transmission mechanism allowing cultural accumulation across generations. Experienced individuals demonstrate skills and explain principles to learners who practice under guidance. Fire's application to tool making and material processing enables technological developments that wouldn't be possible without controlled heat. Many materials change properties when heated in specific ways. Understanding these changes allows their exploitation for tool improvement or completely new material creation. The thermal processing represents sophisticated technology requiring accumulated knowledge about temperatures and heating duration and cooling rates and material properties. This knowledge develops gradually through experimentation and is transmitted culturally through teaching and demonstration, rather than each generation discovering principles independently. Wood hardening represents one of the earliest and most straightforward fire applications to tool technology. Wooden points like those used for digging sticks or simple spears become significantly harder and more durable when heated carefully in flames. The heat drives out moisture and creates chemical changes in wood structure that resist splintering and decay better than untreated wood. This hardening is achieved through holding wooden point in or just above fire until surface darkens and begins to char, but before it burns completely. This requires attention and judgment to achieve desired hardening without destruction of the tool through excessive heating. The hardened wooden points penetrate soil more effectively when used as digging implements. They maintain sharp point longer when used as projectiles. They resist breaking when encountering obstacles. They last substantially longer before needing replacement compared to unhardened wooden tools. These performance improvements justify the minimal time and effort required for heat treatment. The technique requires understanding that heating must be gradual and controlled. Too rapid heating causes surface to burn before interior heats sufficiently. Too slow heating takes excessive time without producing desired effect. Different wood types respond differently to heat treatment. Some harden very effectively, while others show minimal improvement or actually become more brittle and prone to breaking. This wood-specific knowledge accumulates through experience with local wood species. Each region develops understanding of which woods work best for heat-hardened tools and which are better used without heat treatment. Stone heat treating represents more sophisticated thermal processing. Certain stone types, particularly high silica materials like flint, chert, and jasper, experience internal structural changes when heated to specific temperature ranges. These changes make heated stone easier to work through controlled flaking that produces sharper, thinner, more controlled edges than unheated stone allows, while also making the material slightly tougher and less prone to accidental breakage during use. The heat treating process requires understanding both of appropriate temperature, which must be high enough to cause desired structural changes, but not so high that stone cracks from thermal shock or changes color undesirably, and of heating and cooling rates. Rapid temperature changes cause cracking regardless of maximum temperature reached. Successful heat treating demands hours of careful fire management to raise temperature slowly, maintain it for sufficient duration to ensure heat penetrates completely into stone rather than affecting only surface, then allowing equally slow cooling in buried sand or ash that prevents rapid temperature change. The entire process potentially requires 12 to 24 hours from initial heating through final cooling. This substantial time investment demonstrates heat treating's value through improved tool performance that justifies extended processing time. The heat-treated stone shows subtle changes in color and luster that experienced tool makers learn to recognize as indicators of successful heat treating. The visual changes provide feedback about whether thermal processing achieved desired effect or whether stone needs additional treatment or was damaged through improper heating. Archaeological evidence shows that substantial proportion of stone tools at some sites were heat-treated before final shaping. This demonstrates that despite time and fuel investment, Heat treating advantages justified its regular use by prehistoric tool makers who recognized performance improvements heat treatment provided. Resin processing for adhesive creation represents yet more sophisticated fire application. Plant resins that are solid and brittle at normal temperatures become workable when heated, allowing them to be applied to tool hafting or other joints where they cool back to solid state and hold materials together. Though simple resin application provides only weak adhesive that fails under stress and isn't reliable for demanding applications like securing stone points to spear shafts. More effective adhesive comes from processing that uses controlled heat to modify resin chemistry fundamentally, particularly the creation of birch bark tar through heating bark in oxygen-depleted environment. This is achieved by burying bark beneath fire in sand or ash that allows heat transfer while preventing oxygen access that would cause burning rather than tar production. The process requires sustained heating at temperatures between 600 and 700 degrees Fahrenheit, maintained for several hours. The precise temperature and oxygen control necessary for tar production represents sophisticated understanding of thermal chemistry. The produced tar is sticky and pliable when warm, but hardens when cool to create strong permanent bonds that withstand substantial stress. This processed tar represents one of first synthetic materials deliberately created through thermal processing, a substance with properties not found in nature but created through human manipulation of natural materials using fire's transformative heat. The tar production process requires understanding not just of fire and heat, but of how oxygen exclusion changes thermal process outcomes. This level of technological sophistication appears in archaeological record as tar-hafted tools, showing advanced adhesive application techniques. The tar is often mixed with charcoal powder or plant fibers to modify its properties for specific applications. This demonstrates experimental approach to material processing, where practitioners manipulate multiple variables to achieve desired results. Pottery creation through clay firing represents fire application that produces entirely new material category rather than modifying existing materials. Wet clay shaped into vessel form retains that form when dried, but dissolves when exposed to water. This severely limits usefulness for liquid storage or cooking. Whereas clay heated to temperatures above 900 degrees Fahrenheit experiences irreversible chemical changes that create ceramic material impervious to water and capable of withstanding significant temperature variation without damage. This enables creation of waterproof cooking vessels, storage containers, and other applications impossible with unfired clay. The pottery firing process requires sustained high temperature achieved through specially designed kiln structures, providing insulation and heat concentration, or carefully managed open fires, where pottery is surrounded by fuel and coals, creating intense heat zone. The pottery is heated slowly to avoid thermal shock cracking. It's maintained at firing temperature for hours to ensure complete chemical transformation throughout vessel thickness, then cooled slowly to prevent cracking from thermal stress during temperature reduction. The entire firing process demands sophisticated fire control and material understanding developed through experimentation across generations. Potters learn through trial and error what clay types work best, how thick walls can be without cracking, what firing temperatures produce desired properties, how long firing must continue, what cooling rates prevent damage. Knowledge that doesn't emerge from single attempt, but accumulates through many firings, observing what works and what fails, and gradually understanding principles governing success. Archaeological evidence shows pottery appearing relatively late in human technological development. This is likely because clay firing temperatures and techniques are substantially more demanding than earlier fire applications. They require fire control mastery so complete that exact temperature can be managed and sustained for extended periods. This mastery develops only after generations of experience with fire control for simpler applications provided foundation for attempting more demanding thermal processing. The metallurgy that will eventually develop represents ultimate extension of fire's material processing applications, using intense, sustained heat to extract metals from ores and shape them into tools and ornaments. The landscape-scale fire applications that emerge as Homo Sapiens develop confidence and skill in fire control represent step change from using fire within immediate living area to deliberately employing fire as landscape management tool over areas measured in acres or square miles. This expansion from household fire to environmental fire reflects both increasing fire control capability and recognition of fire's effects on plant communities and animal distributions. Understanding develops through observing how natural fires change landscapes and eventually experimenting with deliberate fire application to achieve specific desired effects on vegetation composition and structure. Controlled burning of vegetation to create clearings or encourage specific plant growth appears in pollen records and charcoal deposits from archaeological sites. These show patterns of burning that don't match natural wildfire distributions and suggest deliberate fire application to achieve specific landscape effects. These fire patterns often correlate with changes in plant communities toward species that flourish after fire disturbance, particularly grasses and fire-adapted shrubs and trees that provide food resources for grazing animals. This suggests that humans recognized and deliberately exploited fire's ability to reshape plant communities in ways that increased game animal abundance or improved access to plant foods by removing dense undergrowth that made travel and foraging difficult through thick vegetation. The techniques for landscape burning require understanding of how fire spreads under different conditions, what plant communities burn readily and which resist fire spread, how wind direction affects fire movement and intensity, how natural features like streams and bare rock and previously burned areas can act as fire breaks that contain fire within desired areas, preventing uncontrolled spread into unwanted territories. This understanding accumulates through observation of natural fires and through experimentation with controlled burns on progressively larger scales. Learning through experience what works for controlling fire spread and what creates uncontrollable fires that threaten human safety rather than benefiting human interests. The learning process potentially includes failures where fires escaped control and caused damage. Teaching through negative outcomes, what factors must be managed for successful controlled burning. The benefits of controlled burning include increased visibility across landscape, making game animals easier to locate and approach for hunting. Concentration of grazing animals in recently burned areas where new growth provides preferred forage that is more nutritious and palatable than mature vegetation. Reduction of fuel load that would otherwise support dangerous uncontrolled fires threatening human settlements and resources. And management of forest succession to maintain desired mix of plant communities rather than allowing natural progression toward closed canopy forest that provides less human food value than more open mosaic landscape with diverse habitats. These benefits create significant survival and efficiency improvements in food acquisition and landscape safety. This makes controlled burning worth the labor investment and risk once techniques are mastered sufficiently to achieve desired outcomes reliably without causing unintended damage to valuable resources or human settlements. The timing of controlled burns affects outcomes substantially. Burning during dry season when vegetation is combustible, but before extreme drought makes fires uncontrollable. Choosing weather conditions with moderate wind that spreads fire adequately without creating dangerous intensity. Avoiding periods when endangered resources like bird nests or immature fruit require protection. These timing considerations demonstrate sophisticated understanding of seasonal cycles and ecological relationships that goes beyond simple fire control to encompass broad environmental knowledge. Different regions and vegetation types require different burning frequencies. Some landscapes benefit from annual burning that prevents woody plant encroachment and maintains grass dominance. Others require less frequent burning on multi-year cycles that allow shrubs and small trees to establish before being reset through fire. The optimal frequency depends on local conditions and desired outcomes, and is discovered through experimentation and long-term observation of burning effects. The scale of human landscape modification through fire is difficult to establish definitively from archaeological evidence alone. Fire's effects on plant communities can't be attributed with certainty to human versus natural causes when individual fire events are examined. But studies combining archaeology with pollen analysis showing plant community changes, charcoal deposits indicating fire frequency and intensity, and vegetation modeling suggesting what plant communities would exist without human burning, all suggest that by late Paleolithic human fire use had begun significantly affecting regional vegetation patterns in many areas. These studies indicate creation of more open mosaic landscapes than would exist without human fire management, with greater diversity of plant communities and habitat edges that support higher animal diversity and abundance compared to more uniform vegetation that would develop without regular burning disturbance. This landscape modification represents Homo sapiens beginning to actively engineer their environment rather than simply adapting to conditions they encounter. This is transition from passive acceptance to active management that foreshadows later agricultural landscape transformations, but begins with fire as primary management tool. It requires no domesticated plants or animals, but simply understanding of fire ecology and skilled application of burning to achieve desired landscape conditions. The knowledge required for effective landscape burning includes not just fire behavior, but ecology. Understanding which plants respond favorably to burning by resprouting vigorously or producing abundant seeds. Which animal species benefit from burned landscapes through improved forage or reduced predation risk in open habitats. How frequently burning should occur to maintain desired conditions without degrading soil or eliminating fire-sensitive species that provide important resources. And how burning in different seasons produces different outcomes affecting plant species composition and animal responses. These knowledge systems exist primarily in cultural transmission rather than individual discovery. They accumulate across many human lifetimes through experimentation and observation and teaching. Each generation adds refinements based on their experiences and passes enhanced knowledge to following generation. The social organization required for landscape burning includes coordinating effort of multiple people to ignite and monitor burns across large areas, assigning responsibilities for fire monitoring to prevent escape, establishing protocols for responding if fire threatens to escape control, and maintaining knowledge transmission so burning techniques and timing principles don't get lost when experienced practitioners die. This organizational complexity demonstrates again that fire control involves not just technical skill, but social cooperation and cultural knowledge preservation. The technology depends on human groups, rather than individuals, for successful implementation. The long-term effects of human burning on landscapes include changes in soil nutrients through ash deposition and altered decomposition rates, modifications to plant community composition favoring fire-adapted species over fire-sensitive ones, changes in animal distributions responding to vegetation changes, and potentially regional climate effects through altered albedo and water cycling, though these climate effects are subtle and difficult to detect in archaeological record. The cumulative impact of thousands of years of human burning in some regions created landscapes substantially different from what would exist without human fire use. This demonstrates that humans were significant ecological actors long before agriculture, shaping environments through fire management in ways that affected all other species and processes in those environments. Integration and significance of fire control as foundation for human expansion, improved nutrition, protection, technology, and social complexity represents culmination of everything discussed previously. This brings together multiple threads of fire's transformative impacts on human evolution and recognizes that fire mastery represents not single, simple achievement, but rather complex of interrelated capabilities and knowledge systems that developed gradually across hundreds of thousands of years through accumulated experience and cultural transmission. Fire control is quintessential example of cumulative cultural evolution, where each generation builds on previous knowledge rather than starting from beginning. The question of how Homo sapiens learned to control fire thus has no single simple answer, but rather resolves into understanding that fire control emerged through stages spanning vast time periods and involving multiple independent discoveries and refinements across many human populations in many environments. Beginning with recognition of fire's potential through observation of natural fires and their effects, progressing through maintenance of found fires and accumulated knowledge about fuel requirements and fire behavior and factors affecting combustion success, advancing to deliberate fire creation through friction methods like hand drill and bow drill, or percussion methods using flint and pyrite that required generations of experimentation to perfect and substantial practice investment to master individually. Continuing through development of fire transport techniques using coals or slow-burning fungus and sophisticated hearth structures, optimizing fire management and temperature control methods enabling specific heat levels for different applications, and culminating in fire's integration into every aspect of human life. Fire serves as cooking heat that enabled biological changes including brain expansion, warmth source that enabled geographic expansion into cold climates, protection that reduced predation and enabled confident nighttime activity, social focus that enhanced cultural transmission and group bonding, technological tool that enabled material processing and tool improvements, and landscape management tool that modified environments to enhance food availability. Each of these developments required accumulated knowledge passed across generations through teaching and demonstration, patient experimentation with many failures before successes emerged, social structures supporting knowledge transmission and coordinating fire management responsibilities, and cognitive capabilities including planning ahead, memory of past experiences, causal reasoning about what factors affect outcomes, and teaching ability to transmit understanding to others who haven't experienced everything themselves. This makes fire control not just technological achievement, but demonstration of distinctively human capacity for cumulative cultural evolution where knowledge builds across generations rather than each generation discovering everything independently. The result is transformation of human capability so profound that Homo sapiens with fire control operate in fundamentally different ecological niche than humans without fire, able to survive in environments ranging from tropical forests to Arctic tundra, extract resources and nutrition from foods that would be indigestible without cooking, organize socially in groups large enough to coordinate complex activities and maintain specialized roles, develop and transmit cultural knowledge including sophisticated tool technologies and ecological understanding and social practices, and modify landscapes at scales affecting entire ecosystems, capabilities that non-fire-using hominins couldn't match regardless of their intelligence or physical capabilities. Fire control represents perhaps the single most transformative technology in human history when measured by its total impact on human biology and ecology and culture. The foundation supporting all subsequent human developments from agriculture to writing to industrial civilization, all made possible because countless unknown individuals across hundreds of thousands of years observed fire's behavior carefully, experimented with fire's potential systematically, developed techniques for fire creation and control through trial and error, and taught those techniques to their children who refined them further and passed them forward, until fire transformed from dangerous natural phenomenon beyond human influence into reliable tool completely integrated into human life, the element that more than any other separated humans from other species and made possible everything distinctively human that followed. The accumulated knowledge required for reliable fire control represents one of humanity's most significant intellectual achievements, though one so ancient and fundamental that it becomes invisible to modern people who take fire access for granted without recognizing the sophisticated understanding required to create and maintain and exploit fire effectively for multiple simultaneous purposes. The teaching of fire-making skills represents significant investment of time and attention from experienced practitioners who could be doing other productive activities instead of teaching. But this investment is necessary because fire skills can't be learned adequately through observation alone. They require hands-on practice with guidance and feedback from someone who can recognize errors and provide correction. This means that fire knowledge transmission requires social structures supporting teaching relationships and cultural values, prioritizing knowledge transmission over individual short-term productivity. Structures and values that appear in human societies but rarely in other species. This makes fire control not just technological achievement, but social and cultural one requiring cooperative knowledge transmission across generations. The time required to become proficient firemaker varies by technique and individual aptitude, but typically requires months or years of practice before reliable success is achieved under varying conditions. Bow drill fire perhaps requires weeks or months of practice to master sufficiently for consistent success under good conditions and additional practice to succeed under difficult conditions like wet weather or with suboptimal materials. Percussion fire with flint and pyrite may require similar time investment. This demonstrates that fire-making isn't simple skill learned quickly, but rather craft requiring substantial practice investment justified only by fire's enormous benefits across all aspects of human life. The cognitive demands of fire control include planning ahead to gather and prepare materials before they're needed rather than attempting fire starting without proper preparation. maintaining attention during processes that require sustained effort over minutes or hours without becoming distracted or losing focus, coordinating multiple body actions simultaneously with precise timing and force application, observing feedback indicators like smoke color and ember glow to adjust technique in real time based on changing conditions, and remembering successful procedures while also adapting to varying materials and conditions that require technique modifications rather than rigid adherence to memorized steps. These cognitive demands aren't trivial, but rather require mental capabilities that distinguish humans from other species. The ability to plan, remember, adjust, coordinate, and learn from experience, all being necessary for successful fire control. This suggests that fire mastery both required and potentially drove development of these cognitive capabilities through selection pressure, favoring individuals who could master fire control and thus gain its survival advantages. The social organization around fire management includes assigning responsibilities for fuel gathering and fire tending, maintaining adequate fuel stockpiles for future needs, teaching fire skills to enough people that knowledge doesn't depend on single individual, coordinating fire use for multiple simultaneous purposes like cooking and heating and tool processing, and establishing safety protocols preventing accidental fires that could destroy shelters and resources. This organizational complexity demonstrates that fire control depends on group cooperation rather than individual capability alone. The technology requires sustained social coordination for successful implementation, especially as fire use becomes more sophisticated and integral to all aspects of life. The groups that develop effective fire management organizations gain substantial advantages over groups with less effective organization. This creates selection pressure at group level, favoring social structures and cultural practices that support reliable fire control. The legacy of fire control extends beyond immediate practical benefits to fundamentally shaping human evolution biologically through cooking, enabling brain expansion, geographically through warmth, enabling cold climate colonization, socially through evening gathering, enabling cultural transmission, and cognitively through fire management, requiring and potentially driving development of planning and teaching capabilities. Without fire control, humans would be restricted to warm climates, limited to raw food diet, constraining brain size and requiring extensive chewing time, vulnerable to predators, limiting safe settlement locations, and lacking evening social time for teaching and bonding. With fire control, Homo sapiens became global species capable of thriving in virtually any terrestrial environment, developing large energy-intensive brains, supporting complex thought, creating sophisticated technologies and cultures, and transforming landscapes at scales affecting entire ecosystems. Fire made us human in fundamental sense, enabling the biological and cultural and ecological characteristics that distinguish our species. The archaeological evidence documenting fire control development includes hearth structures showing intentional fire management, burned bones indicating cooking, fire-modified stones showing repeated heating, spatial organization of sites around fire features, charcoal deposits indicating what woods were burned, and eventually fire-altered materials like heat-treated stone and pottery showing sophisticated thermal processing. This evidence accumulates across hundreds of thousands of years, demonstrating gradual refinement of fire control rather than sudden appearance of complete fire mastery. The earliest evidence is ambiguous and debated, with some claimed hearth features potentially being natural rather than human-made. But by several 100,000 years ago, evidence becomes unambiguous, with clearly constructed hearths and extensive burning indicating regular fire use. By 50,000 years ago, evidence shows sophisticated fire management, including heat-treating stone and creating complex hearth structures, and using fire for landscape management. This demonstrates progressive development of capabilities over vast time periods. The chronology of fire control development remains active research area, with new discoveries and analytical techniques continuing to refine understanding of when and where different fire control capabilities first appeared. Some sites show evidence of fire use dating back over 1 million years, though whether this represents controlled fire or opportunistic use of natural fire remains debated. More definitive evidence of deliberate fire creation through friction or percussion appears much later in archaeological record. The gap between fire maintenance and fire creation capabilities may span hundreds of thousands of years. This demonstrates that even once humans recognized fire's benefits and learned to maintain natural fire, developing reliable fire creation methods required enormous time investment and countless experiments across many generations before techniques were perfected sufficiently for practical use. The geographic spread of fire control shows interesting patterns, with some regions adopting fire use earlier than others based on local conditions and needs. Cold climate regions show earlier evidence of sophisticated fire management compared to tropical regions where fire is less essential for survival. This suggests that necessity drove innovation, with groups facing greatest survival challenges from cold developing most advanced fire control capabilities earliest. However, fire control eventually spreads to virtually all human populations, regardless of climate, demonstrating universal recognition of fire's benefits once techniques are mastered. The cultural transmission of fire knowledge across populations and generations represents crucial mechanism allowing fire control to spread and improve. Groups that successfully maintain fire knowledge through teaching and practice gain advantages that allow them to thrive and expand, while groups that lose fire knowledge face severe disadvantages. The different fire creation methods develop independently in different regions based on available materials and cultural preferences. Friction fire dominates in regions where suitable woods are abundant. Percussion fire becomes preferred in regions where flint and pyrite are readily available. Some populations know both methods and choose between them based on circumstances. This demonstrates that fire control isn't single uniform technology, but rather diverse set of techniques adapted to local conditions and continuously refined through practice and innovation. The diversity of fire control methods also provides redundancy, ensuring that fire knowledge persists even if particular techniques are temporarily lost or become impractical due to changing conditions. The environmental impacts of human fire use extend beyond immediate landscape modifications to potentially affecting regional and even global climate over long time scales. The accumulation of charcoal in sediment cores from lakes and oceans provides record of fire activity over millions of years. This shows dramatic increases in fire frequency correlating with human population expansion and technological development. While natural fires existed long before humans, human-controlled fire adds substantially to total fire activity, especially in regions where natural ignition sources are rare. The smoke and particulates from human fires may affect atmospheric composition and climate, though these effects are subtle compared to natural climate variations and difficult to isolate in paleoclimate records. The relationship between fire control and other human technological developments shows interesting patterns of mutual reinforcement. Fire enables more sophisticated tool making through heat treatment and provides light for evening craft work. Better tools enable more efficient fuel gathering and fire structure construction. Cooking enables better nutrition supporting larger brains capable of more complex planning and innovation. Larger brains develop more sophisticated fire management techniques. This positive feedback between fire control and other capabilities accelerates human technological and cognitive development, creating a virtuous cycle where improvements in one area enable improvements in others. Fire control is both cause and consequence of human cognitive and cultural evolution, rather than being simply one technology among many. The symbolic and ritual significance of fire in human cultures provides another dimension of fire's importance beyond practical applications. Fire appears in origin myths and religious ceremonies across virtually all human cultures, suggesting deep psychological and spiritual connection to fire that extends beyond its utilitarian functions. The tending of sacred or eternal flames, the use of fire in purification rituals, the association of fire with transformation and renewal, all point to fire occupying special place in human consciousness. This symbolic dimension may have roots extending back to earliest fire control, when maintaining fire literally meant difference between life and death, creating profound emotional associations that persist even in modern contexts where fire is no longer essential for survival. The continued relevance of fire knowledge in modern contexts demonstrates that ancient fire control skills haven't become completely obsolete despite technological advances providing alternative heat and light sources. Outdoor recreation and wilderness survival situations still benefit from fire-making knowledge. Traditional crafts and cultural practices maintain fire skills as living traditions. The principles learned through mastering fire control, patience, attention to detail, understanding of natural processes, systematic experimentation, remain valuable even when applied to modern contexts far removed from primitive survival. Teaching fire making to young people provides not just practical skill, but connection to human heritage and appreciation for technological knowledge that sustained ancestors through countless generations. The future of fire control faces interesting questions as human society grapples with fire's environmental impacts, particularly in context of climate change and air quality concerns. The same fire that enabled human survival and development now contributes to atmospheric pollution and greenhouse gas emissions when used at industrial scales. Finding balance between fire's continued practical uses in cooking and heating and manufacturing and the need to reduce emissions requires sophisticated understanding of combustion chemistry and alternative technologies. Yet completely eliminating fire use seems neither practical nor desirable given fire's deep integration into human culture and continued utility for many applications. The challenge becomes managing fire use responsibly while maintaining connection to this fundamental human technology. The lessons from studying how humans learned fire control have applications beyond historical interest. Understanding how complex technical knowledge develops and transmits across generations informs educational approaches and technology transfer programs. Recognizing importance of hands-on practice and mentorship relationships in skill acquisition. Appreciating value of patient experimentation and learning from failures. Acknowledging that sophisticated capabilities develop gradually through accumulated small improvements rather than sudden breakthroughs. These insights from fire control history apply to learning any complex skill or technology, whether ancient or modern. The human capacity for cumulative cultural evolution that enabled fire mastery continues operating today, allowing each generation to build on previous knowledge rather than starting from zero. Fire control exemplifies this distinctively human capability while also demonstrating its profound importance for human survival and development. The story of how humans learned to control fire ultimately is a story of human capacity for observation, experimentation, learning, teaching, and cooperation. The unknown individuals who first maintained natural fire, who discovered friction fire techniques through countless attempts, who experimented with different woods and tinders, who taught these skills to children and apprentices, who applied fire to new purposes like cooking and tool making and landscape management. These people created foundation for everything that followed in human history. Their patient work across hundreds of thousands of years transformed fire from dangerous natural phenomenon into a reliable tool that enabled human expansion across planet and development of complex civilizations. We are beneficiaries of their accumulated knowledge and ingenuity. Understanding their achievement helps us appreciate both the sophistication of ancient technologies and the remarkable human capacity for cultural evolution that made fire control and all subsequent technological developments possible. Fire didn't just warm our bodies and cook our food, it forged our species into what we are today, tool users and teachers and innovators building endlessly on knowledge inherited from countless generations who came before.